Hello, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're tuning in from. And welcome to our webinar. You're listening to ICSIA Talks, episode 19, How to Introduce Authoring Assistance and Gain User Acceptance with Alexander Becker. My name is Amandine Mondelis, Marketing Coordinator here at ICSIA Soft. If you're a returning listener of the ICSIA Talks series, you are probably used to hearing my colleague Sydney Jones' voice. Sydney has been hosting the webinar since its inception back in September 2018, 18 episodes ago. And I'm happy to say that I will be taking over as your host today. ICSIA Talks is a webinar series that covers data, agile documentation, localization, ICSIASoft's very own CCMS, and more. We broadcast new episodes periodically, each one featuring a hot topic in the TechCom industry. Here are a few details to keep in mind before we dive in. About an hour after the webinar airs, we will provide you a link to its recording. You can then share it with your peers or watch it again. At the end of the presentation, we'll have a Q&A session with our speaker du jour. Please feel free to submit your questions into the questions section panel at any point during the presentation. Now, time to kick off today's episode. Our guest today is Alexander Becker, Head of Sales at Congri Language Technologies. Alexander is joining us from Germany. Alexander, it is my pleasure to have you today as my guest. Welcome to ICSIA Talks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Hello. Well, my name is Alexander Becker. A short introduction of myself. I'm head of sales at Congri Language Technologies. And from my background, I'm a computational linguist. So Congri basically is my professional home because I'm very much interested in handling natural language processing tasks. And our company produces a software that is able to do natural language checks, so authoring assistance. And I started at Congri in the consulting department and provided support for a go-live of our software for customers, and later on moved to the sales department. So I had a lot of history so far within the last 8 years, especially about the topic for today, how to start authoring assistance in a company, how to implement it, and how to have a look on the user acceptance.
All right, thank you, Alexander. So now let's take a quick look at the agenda. I'll let you introduce it, Alexander.
Perfect. Okay, so for today, I would like to divide the presentation into 4 parts. First of all, I would like to have a common understanding of what authoring assistance means if we are talking about it today. Then I would like to show you some typical goals and effects of authoring assistance because they affect how to implement an authoring assistance. And then I would like to put on the focus on how to actually do the implementation, what to take care about and what not to do. And last would be a question and answer section. Please feel free to submit questions anytime during the webinar. We will answer them at the end. Okay, before we start, I would quickly like to ask you to provide a few details about you, especially regarding the question if you have a style guide. I would like to use this information to adjust the following presentation a bit to your answers. And I would like to ask you, do you have a style guide? Is it used? Do you have one of those style guides, but it's outdated? Don't you have a style guide at all? Or don't you have a style guide, but do you plan to implement one? That would be interesting for the remainder of the webinar.
Okay, so I will launch the survey right now. I will give a few seconds for answers to come in.
So I'm sorry if your answer is not in the list, but those are the typical answers we get when we ask the question.
Okay, just a couple more seconds here. Okay, and I will share the results now.
Okay, sounds good. So almost half of the participants have a style guide. The next biggest section is they have a style guide, but it is outdated. There's quite a large proportion of participants that do not have a style guide at all. And some of you are thinking of one. That's good. Perfect. Okay. This will help us. Then I would say let's move on to the first item, the common understanding of authoring assistance. So the diagram you're currently seeing is basically what we understand or what I understand when I talk about authoring assistance. You have a content creation process in your company. That means, easily spoken, someone creates text somewhere, either in Xsoft CCMS or in Word or wherever. Someone types something into an editor window. And when he does that, he can be supported. A tool can support him in writing better content in terms of is it understandable? You can use your corporate terminology, your brand names, your wording to have a consistent wording of your product names or specific items in your company. You can have a sentence reuse feature to show similar sentences that already were written in the past to the author. And those three orange boxes here, the linguistic language check, a terminology component that provides a terminology check, and a sentence reuse is what I understand when I talk about authoring assistance. That's not the definition that everyone uses. There's quite some companies out there that say authoring assistance and only mean, for example, the sentence reuse feature, or maybe some easy spell check like Handspell, where you check for similarity for similar words, for example. But when I say authoring assistance, I mean this triple of features that are provided to the author. And the interesting thing about this picture is also that it already shows some peripheral systems such as machine translation or general translation management systems. There could be more, but those are frequent systems we encounter. So quite often we have translation processes in companies and they have issues if content is not good enough. That might be issues with feedback iterations during the translation process because the content cannot be understood that good, or if machine translation cannot properly automatically translate content because the sentences are too complex. And authoring assistance can help you in improving those processes, and that's why we used those wheels to depict this a bit. They have effects on the other systems that are attached or the other processes that are attached. So authoring assistance does not only interact with the content creation process, it also has effects to the follow-up processes. But that for the authoring assistance definition. Now that we have a common understanding of the three main features of authoring assistance, I understand when I talk about it. Let's move on to the goals. Typically, you have a goal you would like to achieve when using authoring assistance, and some of the typical goals we encounter on the markets are listed on the slide here. A very common goal is you have a tone of voice and you would like to use it consistently across your company. So everyone should write in the same tone of voice when he creates content for the company. That's important because the customer journey frequently starts at different points and with a Google search, for example, in the internet. And you will find a lot of content there, and not only the marketing content that is targeted at new customers, you will also find repair instructions, service documentation, and other content in the internet. Or even, for example, if you have a service bulletin, you will find answers there. And it's always good to present your company as in a certain way according to your tone of voice. And that's what you can use authoring assistants for. This has to do with the terminology check as well. Terminology basically is a consistent wording across your company. This helps to improve understanding between your company and your customer. So for example, if you have a manual about a specific product and always name the product in a different way, this might be confusing for the reader. So it's good to have it named consistently, and this is what you use terminology for. That's the definition of specific, let's say, words. Specifically speaking, those words are called terms in your company that have a special meaning. And you can also say, maybe there are other synonym words in my terminology, but they should not be used. All this is part of the terminology. Then I already said that translation costs might be a driver for an authoring assistance. If you have a translation process, you might save money by reusing sentences. That's, for example, where authoring assistance in the sense of sentence reuse is very useful. Consistent terminology already helps a lot, but you can also use certain checking rules, such as did you write unambiguous sentences, or did you add determiners to your noun phrases, or did you split up enumerations as lists in your data document, for example? This is what you can check with a software, and this targets translation costs, or to be exact, the reduction of translation costs. There are other goals. Simplify Technical English is more one of those goals that has legal reasons. For example, if you are in the aviation industry, you typically have to write according to Simplify Technical English for legal reasons. But another frequent reason, for example, is if you have no native speaker. You have a lot of people in your company creating content, and not everyone is a linguistic genius, and not everyone might be fluent in English, for example. For example, I'm not an English non-native speaker. I'm sorry about that. I lack certain knowledge about the language, and I express myself sometimes in a bit complex way. And authoring assistance can help you, at least for written language, to improve that situation. And especially in the context of the Ixiasoft CCMS, where we frequently have to do with subject matter expert contributing content to a central system, this non-native speaker aspect, or maybe a bit more general speaking, the non-linguistic genius, the standard guy or woman who writes content, can be supported by an authoring assistance in creating better content when typing the content. So much for the goals. Let's have a look at the effects of an authoring assistance. So this is kind of the spoiler slide. There's almost two goals that typically are the drivers for authoring assistance. Of course, I would like to increase content quality. As said with the goals, for example, if you would like to provide a certain tone of voice to the market, the underlying reason is that you would like to create convincing content in a certain way that attracts your potential customers. And for this, you need consistent wording and a consistent writing style according for your tone of voice guideline, for example. Also, there's something simple such as reduced spelling or grammar issues. We had a presentation in the past where we added a typo to the heading of the slide just to make this visible how disturbing a typo might be. And everyone focused on this typo. For example, let it be effects without the C, for example. You would have looked at this word and you might wonder why I didn't find this typo, although I'm talking about authoring assistance, and it completely removes your focus from this presentation if there's a typo on the slide. So typos or grammar issues should not be underestimated when you do them in your content. And by using authoring assistance, you can simply reduce them, especially if you use a rule-based language check, which is a very exact system, you can reduce them. And of course, you can improve your writing style in terms of translation-oriented writing, for example, or to create content that is better understandable by others. You could also use rules for, let's say, bias-free language and pay attention to not to write a blacklist, but use blocklist instead, for example. And those are the goals to increase quality. Increasing quality means you write content and you get feedback how to improve it. This will have an effect on your content. It will not have a saving effect immediately. You might create more turnover in the end, but it's quite difficult to measure. It basically affects the content quality. That's one of the dimensions. The other typical dimension is the cost-saving dimension. Of course, especially authoring assistant software does cost money. You have to create and invest for this. You have to plan the change management. You have to plan the capacity to introduce the software to your company. And this all is an investment. And in the ideal case, the cost-saving effects of the introduction of such a software nivelates the investment. So you have a return of investment. And you typically do this by saving time, because time is something that has to be provided by your employees. And they get their money per month. And if you save time, you have a saving and the money you have to spend on your employees by doing things that an authoring assistant could do for them, such as searching in the term base while writing, providing correction proposals, and correct spellings without having one to check a writing guide, for example. You can improve the review speed, for example, by the sentence reuse feature. If the authoring memory that provides you similar sentences that were created in the past only consists of sentences that have already been reviewed, you can safely reuse those sentences and reduce the need for a review later on. As said, with the translation processes, for example, if you have frequently questions from the translation department about your content, they have to be answered. And if you reduce those questions by creating better content, you also save time for answering questions from the translation process, and this in turn saves you time in your creation process and thus costs. And those are the two typical effects. There's, of course, other effects, like reducing legal risks, such as, for example, when using STE. And of course, you also have effects such as strengthening your brand or building up customer trust, or even differentiation from your competition using your text content, your content. But those are the main typical effects of authoring assistants, and they can even be calculated. Okay, so this all sounds good. We now have a common understanding of authoring assistants. We had a look at typical goals. We have seen two very interesting goals of an authoring assistant. But at this point, I would like to also point out some limits of an authoring assistant. So typically, authoring assistants does not have word knowledge. Word knowledge means basically you can write a sentence about green mouses dreaming furiously. As long as it is grammatically correct, the software will not complain about it because it does not understand what you're writing. It is just looking at the linguistic surface of your software, of your content, but not on the meaning of the sentences. There might be a shallow set of meaning information or sense information on a word level, such as if something a product name or something a company name, but there is no understanding of your content. And the reason why I emphasize this aspect is because I even had in the past customers that asked me or told me that in scope of a support request, they had the impression that the software didn't understand their content. Yes, it is the case. The software does not have word knowledge. It's just linguistic information. Technically, there's possibilities to implement word knowledge to such a checking system, but it's very, very time consuming, expensive, and fragile in maintenance. So this is why we do not have such a system at the moment. Then there's another limit, that is coverage. So of course, authoring assistant systems are quite powerful. You can have rule-based linguistic language check. You can have automatic term variant recognition. You can have the recognition of very complex linguistic phenomena. For example, if a sentence is too complex, can be identified based on the amount of noun phrases. For this, you have to know what a noun phrase is and how to count them in a sentence. Or you can have rules like write the condition of a conditional sentence at the beginning and the action afterwards, or the other way around, depending on what you prefer. And for this, you have to realize what a conditional sentence is. And not every conditional sentence starts with an if. And this is quite some interesting linguistic knowledge, but it simply can't do everything. So there's simply limits in the implementation. Some things aren't implemented, even though they would be technically possible. And this is what I mean with coverage. The systems are powerful, but they have limits and you have to be aware of them. This is something relevant for the user acceptance because you have to make this known to your users when implementing an authoring assistance, that it can have limits. And there's another aspect, of course, it cannot replace the writer. So for example, if you type something in XRSoft CCMS, the XRSoft add-on can provide you information about how it could be improved. And maybe you get a correction proposal for a typo or a terminology violation, or maybe you get a proposal for a similar sentence, but the text does not produce the content on its own. The expert who's creating the content is still writing the text. And it's not a goal of the system to replace a writer. The only goal is to support him or her. Okay, well, then all is good. We know the limits as well. Let's buy a software. Please stop. Just buying software doesn't solve an issue. That's a very important aspect to realize. Of course, it is good to implement an authoring assistance because you can reach those goals. You have certain effects, and even with the limits, it's still a gain. But just buying won't work. You have to consider some things. And I prepared a slide for this, but before we have a look at how to do it right, let's maybe have a look at how not to do it. So for example, basically we could have added here, just buy the software and assume everything will work out of the box. It would be the first fail. This won't work. Then there is some other aspects. For example, an authoring assistance, especially when talking about the linguistic check, it consists of rules. And those rules have a certain coverage. As said in the limit slide, not everything can be checked, but a lot of things can be checked. And you might be tempted to enable all of the rules in the software. Please don't do that. Because if you are a sporadic user of an XRSoft CCMS, a subject matter expert contributing some information about a product, for example, and you type 2 sentences and get 20 rules of violations of your style guide, you won't have a look at them. You will simply lose user acceptance based on the sheer number of messages that will be shown. The system can find all those violations, but it's not helpful to the author. So you should make sure that you have or that you select a set of rules that is applicable to your content and your users. The next issue might be related. Please don't enable all features at once. So we've seen in the slide, in the overview slide of authoring assistance, that authoring assistance consists of multiple parts. You can have a term base, you can have a term check, you can have a linguistic spell check, you can have an authoring memory. And similar to just buying a tool, it's not a good idea to just buy all the features and enable them, because you should convince your users to use the software. And imagine you open up XRCCMS on Monday, and over the weekend, Conriva is deployed, and you get a lot of authoring assistance feature in XRSoft CCMS. 3 new panels. One is telling you about your language quality, the other one is telling you about your terminology, and the last one is telling you about similar sentences. That's quite overwhelming and a very big change, and it will create a certain reaction. People will be skeptical about these new features. They have to do their daily work and not to learn a new software on Monday. And that's why it might be a better idea to focus on the most important issues first. For example, if one of your goals is to reduce translation costs, then maybe you want to start with the authoring memory. Or if one of your goals is to reduce translation costs in terms of the time consumed by answering questions of the translation department, maybe the language check would be the first option to go for. And if you start with one of those options, the request for more features will arise if the need exists. For example, if you provide a linguistic language check and you get feedback for your users about the writing style and maybe your tone of voice, people will start asking, well, can't we check our terminology as well? And if we do, for certain cases, why can't I have a look at the terminology already? Or why do I get this message over and over again? Why can't I just reuse the sentence I have written 2 weeks ago? We could use something like a sentence database, and then you are at the authoring memory feature. But this means that the need for such a feature was formulated or was a feedback of your users, and there's the actual need to implement this feature, but it's not automatically given in the first place. And if users need something and they get it, they're happy about it. If you just enable all of the features at the beginning, they are overwhelmed and they tend to reject the feature set. Then similar to enabling all rules, there is showing too much irrelevant messages. This means there's, for example, multiple types of messages for a language check that can be provided. There's some things like errors you can do, such as a typo, a grammar issue, or maybe you used a forbidden word of your term base. This is simply an error and you have to fix it. And there often is also a correction proposal that you can simply click and apply to your document. However, especially when it comes down to writing style and applying your tone of voice guideline, you might face messages that simply want to confirm that you are writing according to your style guide. An authoring assistant will not create the content for you. You always have to create the content as an expert on your own, but it will support you in creating the content according to your writing style guide. And as we heard in the poll, half of the participants list have a style guide. So it might be a good idea to have a software ensuring that your style guide is actually applied. But there are messages that simply need confirmation from the author. For example, about passive voice. Passive voice in certain situations is a bad idea because it hides the person who should actually do something. However, passive voice has its place in a language. There's reasons why we should use passive voice. So the software can, of course, recognize passive voice, but sometimes it's okay to use passive voice and sometimes it's not. The software cannot always identify those cases where it should not be used. And thus enabling a rule about passive voice might cause a message that is a so-called false alert. It is not relevant for the author and he has to say, no, I don't want to change my content. Passive voice is fine for me in this case. And there's multiple of those messages. And if you enable too much of those messages, people will have to confirm a lot of messages that are simply no need to change your content. And this again will reduce user acceptance because it's better to only show messages that are actually useful for the author when he has to change something, and then he's also happy that the software told him about that. Otherwise, he would just ignore a lot of messages, and at some point in time, if they run a document check and they say, oh, now I have to click all those messages and confirm that I really want to write this way. And that's kind of a frustration that is created that should be avoided. The same is with sentences. If you have a sentence database, it should contain good content and not much of duplicates or content that aren't actually better than the content that is written by the author. For example, you can use a translation memory to populate your authoring memory. However, there might be old sentences in there, 25 years old, and they do not apply to your style guide. They do not follow your style guide or your term base, and they should not be shown to the author. And last item here, a very big issue is to neglect the change management. It sounds somewhat obvious, but this is one of the issues we sometimes realize in projects. There is people we talk to when it comes to implementing an authoring assistant. Typically, those are the key users or the the deciders of a company, but the people who will have to work with the software are more. Those are the subject matter experts everywhere in your company. Those are technical writers. Those are people from the marketing department for marketing communication. And they're typically not involved in the decision process or not that much. And before implementing or during the implementation of such a software, you have to talk to those users. You have to explain to them why you introduce the software, make them aware of the goals you would like to achieve with the software, explain them the limits of the software so they don't have too high expectations for the software. So it's kind of expectation management here. And they will also start working for your project, because if you say the goal is to reduce translation costs and you implement the authoring assistance and people realize that it might be good to enable maybe a certain rule to catch a problem that causes questions from the translation department, they can provide you feedback. But this only happens if you explain to them what you're going to do. And if you don't do that, you will lose user acceptance on that side. They will get frustrated because the software does only create more workload. You have to work with it, but they might not understand why they use it at all. Okay, so much for the how to fail. Then the last thing I would like to motivate is a so-called concept. I named this phased implementation. So it's not my personal invention, but it's a good approach. On the last slide, we had this bullet point, don't enable the complete feature set at once. A similar aspect is if you decide to go for an authoring assistance, to maybe start with one group of key users first and then organically grow in your company. The reason is as follows. You kind of have to face the reality. Your content is written in a certain way. A lot of you already have a style guide. Maybe it's a bit outdated, but most of you have a style guide. And of course, you all wanted to write according to the style guide. But it doesn't mean that your content is actually written according to the style guide, because there might be a lot of messages in your style guide or a lot of rules in your style guide, and it might just be too much, or maybe someone didn't know about a particular rule. All this content exists. And if you enable an authoring assistance that checks for all of those rules, it will find all the violations it finds every time. And this might be frustrating. So better focus on the most important rules. So maybe have a look at your style guide, identify the rules that are most important for you, and start with those. And also have a check against your content. So pick a representative set of documents of your CCMS, have it bite checked with an authoring assistance, and have a look at the rule set that fire. And you might realize that certain rules of your style guide were never considered. Maybe you have added them years ago, but nobody knew about it. And if you now enable those rules in an authoring assistance, it will fire every time you encounter old existing content with this violation. And that might cause too much messages. And if this message is not that relevant or less relevant as others, you might at the beginning disable it. Over the time, your content quality in general will increase. So if the software for the third time explained you that you should add a determiner in front of a noun phrase, you will learn it. And next time you will do this automatically. And there is a reporting typically where you can investigate the amount of messages fired by the software. And if this amount of messages decreases, it means people get less messages, so they write better content. And if this happens, you can enable those other rules because your content can be further improved. You have more rules typically than you should enable at the beginning in your style guide. And so you can successively improve your writers, your content, and the user acceptance. This is similar to the start small bullet point, the second bullet point on this slide. I already explained the concept of starting with the most relevant rules first. A good approach is also to provide the other configurations as optional rule sets, because there's different kind of writing profiles in your company. There's experts, and there's maybe subject matter experts that only from time to time contribute content to your system. And you can define that the less strict set is the default, but you can optionally allow to use a stricter rule set for the experts or the more advanced users, so that at least they will already check for the better set of content rules. And this in combination, facing the reality and starting small, can be used to move towards your full style guide and tone of voice over time. And at some point in time, you will reach that most of your content is according to your style guide, your tone of voice guideline. And if someone is new in your company, you have an onboarding concept, and he will learn from the software immediately what he has to do. Okay, I already motivated a bit the talk to the users aspect on the last slide. Explain your goals, because it creates user acceptance and it has the effect that people start to work towards your goal together with you. And a very important thing about that is listen to your feedback, especially regarding the rule set. Of course, your style guide lists a lot of messages, and of course, all your content should be created according to your style guide already because you defined it. But a machine is kind of, let's say, strict. What it finds it everywhere. And if people provide you the feedback that there's too much messages, you have to reduce the amount of messages to keep up your user acceptance, to make users use the software. Otherwise, they will start to work against the system. If you're keen enough, you will be able to circumvent every of the ordering assistance systems on the market, and that should not happen. People should work together with the system. They should be happy to get feedback from the system, and typically they are happy if it helps them. And if it does not help them, they will say that, but for this you have to listen to the feedback. A good approach to do this is to define key users. So whenever you implement ordering assistance in a particular division or writing context, promote someone who is the key user for the system, who might channel questions or collect questions or maybe build up some knowledge about the software, why it behaves in a certain way, or where are the limits of the system. And then he can be kind of a special contact person for everyone in this team to get quick feedback if they have a question about the system. Okay, so much for the phased implementation. Then at last, I would like to quickly show you how this can look like in practice. For this, we will share my screen.
Okay, Alexander, so I will now allow you to share your screen.
Okay. You should be able to see a wonderful blue desktop.
Yes.
And then we will start up the XSoft CCMS. So imagine you're a subject matter expert and you have a feedback task from your support. You should clarify something in a piece of content, and you are asked to add us to this document here. You will open this up in XSoft CCMS, in this case in the web system. You do not have to install anything. You can just open up your browser and then it's there already. And here's your content, and you know, okay, here at this paragraph, I have to add this information. Then you can quickly navigate there, add a new paragraph and add your content, such as put on the headphone, for example. That was something that should be clarified. And now you're basically done. So that's the standard workflow you have in the XSoft CCMS. You can contribute content very easily here. However, as you can see on the right side already, there's messages of the language check. And for example, I can see here that I have terminology issues. I can quickly focus on those issues and filter to term messages, and can see that I have an issue with headphone here. That's a so-called negative form. It's a forbidden to write headphone. I always should use headset. I can click on this and it will be added to my content, and content will be checked automatically again. And this will give me an optical indicator about my document. I get rid of this red indicator here. I also get a green bar up here. That's quite easy to realize. And if I still have time, maybe I can work on the other style guide messages as well. If not, I can simply check in the document and manifest my changes. And that's quite of an easy implementation. So there's not that much of feature set. You have the language check here. You have a certain set of messages here. You have filter possibilities based on your categories, and you have a reporting configuration for the release level that allows the user to interact with the messages to get a good feedback signal from the system. And the entry burden to use this is very low. You don't have to remember to click a button. You don't have to remember to turn something on. It's just there. It's already visible when you type. And you also don't have to get a training about this. Maybe for the filtering, you have to know that this filtering works if you click on a category here, but that's basically all. Clicking a green hyperlink is easy. This is a typical situation for subject matter experts here. If you have power users, you might also want to show the terminology research for definitions, for example, for such decision cases. Should I use improvement or upgrade? I don't know. Let's have a look at the terminology to show the definition. For power users, you can show the terminology information here, such as definition and attributes. Or you can show the sentence reuse feature that shows you that there's a similar sentence with this, including improvement as word. So he knows, okay, that's the correct one. But for the sporadic user, this feature set with this rule configuration is perfectly fine. And that's basically all I wanted to show you today.
Okay, thank you, Alexander. Okay, so, well, thank you, Alexander, for a great presentation. So we will now be moving into the question section of the presentation. So just a note that Ixisoft's data specialist, Lee White, is also here for the Q&A. And again, a quick reminder that you can type a question into the questions section of your control panel, which is located in the upper left-hand corner of your screen. Okay, so the first question is, do I have to create, configure the rules on my own?
That's a good question. So we've seen the Ixisoft TCMS at the end. There was already a rule configuration available. And if you implement your authoring assistance using the Ixisoft add-on, you get presets that you can use to start already. So this overall question, which rules to use, they are already available as presets. There's presets, for example, for translation-oriented writing or for technical writing or for marketing communication that target specific goals from this goal slide we have seen before. And you can just enable one of those and start with them and adjust it to your needs over time. The other option is, and both is possible and both are valid approaches for an implementation. The other option is, especially if you have a style guide, to have it applied by us in a workshop. So authoring assistance has a lot of rules, and we will have a look at your style guide, check all the rules in the style guide, and check whether the software can identify those issues or not. And then you will get a mapping of the authoring assistance rules to your style guide. And then the second stage would be to identify the most important rules to keep your user acceptance for the phased implementation, and maybe define 2 or maybe 3 sets of rules. One that should be available for everyone in the company because it's the baseline check, such as checking for spelling, grammar, and terminology, maybe certain style rules, and another one for more experienced writers or specific target audiences, such as technical documentation or marketing documentation. That's what we will do for you. You don't have to buy consulting for this. You can just do it on your own if you like. Both is possible.
Okay, so our next question is, what do you estimate is the setup and administration burden in terms of person time for authoring assistance? Does it change depending on your numbers of riders?
Yes, it does change depending on your numbers of riders. To be more exact, it might change depending on the number of user groups. So, for example, you can use the system to check small texts in your ERP system that are shown in your web shop. Those typically follow a different writing style than messages in your technical documentation or in the marketing communication team. So per team, you might have different goals and different rules you would like to enable. And that's where the effort is. However, after the implementation phase, so during the ramp up, of course, you have higher efforts to get the system up and running and configure it to your needs. But after a few months, you typically have, as an average effort to maintain such a system, half a day per month. So half a person day per month for the basic load of managing such a system. Typically, you have to do 2 tasks. You have to answer questions of your users, and the other one is user lexicon maintenance, so making words known to the system that are not yet known, for example, so company-specific words typically. And that requires a half a person day per month, approximately.
Okay. Do I need to build up terminology first?
I'd say no, because especially if you already have writing rules, you already have a goal that you would like to achieve. And of course, terminology supports this goal. It's better to have specific wording on a term level. But if you don't have any terminology, you can already start with all the remainder of the rules, such as correct spelling, correct grammar, writing style, tone of voice. And if you have the goal of saving costs, you can also simply start using an authoring memory for a sentence reuse feature without terminology, because it will have the effect whether you have terminology or not. So you don't need terminology in the beginning. It will always help you, and the recommendation is to start terminology work, but you don't have to wait for a certain term base to be done. A frequent misunderstanding or common misunderstanding here is also that you will start a terminology project and finish it at some time and then use your term base. That's not how it works. Terminology typically is a living thing, so you will change your terminology anyway over time. You will typically evolve it, improve it over time. So just start with whatever you have. If you don't have any, start anyway and build it up in parallel.
Okay, so our next question is it possible to set up rules per user role in the CCMS? For instance, if you have just the basic role appear for contributors SMEs, is it possible to have a more detailed rule set up for writers?
Okay, yeah. Yes, that's possible. It basically was the use case we've seen in the short demo part. So there was a specific rule set enabled for the user group of subject matter experts, which was less strict than other rule sets. Because we enabled rules that are most important for this user group, but not all of the rules. And you can configure this on a user group level. You can have multiple user groups, you can have multiple configurations, and you can define which user group gets which configuration. You can even define it in which system.
Thank you, Alexander. And so we have one more question. So we are already writing according to our style guide, and we are wondering why would we need a tool?
Yes. So if you don't have a goal that you would like to achieve with the tool, then please don't buy one. That's the honest answer for this. If you have goals, such as I would like to save translation costs, then you typically can identify use cases where it should help you. For example, if you have efforts by answering questions, or if you have feedback from your customers if they do not understand a repair instruction, for example. Then you have a use case, and there is an underlying goal of this use case, and that's the reason why you should use such an authoring assistance, even if you already are using your style guide, because if those use cases exist, it means just having the style guide is not enough. And besides that, it's also the fact that even if you have a style guide, even if it is a small one, it typically is the case that you are not that exact as the software will manage to find it. So the software will find issues in your text, even if you are writing according to your style guide, and even if you have very, very expert users to write content. You can try this out. You can just send some content. We will have a look at it and show you the messages that were found by the system. So you get an impression of what violations are still left, even though you are writing according to your style guide.
Okay. Well, thank you, Alexander. So that's a wrap for ExitTalks episode 19. Thank you so much to you, Alexander, for being here. And our next webinar will be in winter 2021. Remember that if you would like to be featured in one of our webinars or have a unique topic idea, you can get in touch with us at team.ccms@exiosoft.com. We'll see you soon.
See you soon. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.